We tell a bar mitzvah boy, you are now a man. Well, what exactly does that mean, to be a man? We'll learn it from the original example of who became men at the age of 13, Shimon and Levi, in our parsha this week. In pasuk Vayichol Shnei Bnei Yaakov Shimon Levi Achei Dino Ish Char B'Goyim, the pasuk that says that after Dino was abducted, the two brothers Shimon and Levi took their swords and they went and attacked and massacred Shechem. Zogen Chazal, the Medrash tells us, as is einen dann gewesen 13 Jahre alt, that at that time they were 13 years old. And therefore, und von dem lernt man aus dem Din, from there we extrapolate the halacha, which is from Ben Shlosheh Seder Mitzvahs, that 13 is the age at which a person becomes obligated, a male, in the fulfillment of mitzvahs. So the fact that 13 is the age when we call a person a man, ish, which is a specific title that implies more than just age. Was Vayishlach gadlus, it represents a certain maturity or even authority. Like, for example, Dasan and Aviram said to Moshe, who made you the ish over us, meaning the authority over us? Or as David HaMelech says to Shlomo HaMelech, you should strengthen yourself and become a man, leader, somebody of prominence and authority. So das says that tells us as zu Gimel Shana de Grechte zu der Meile von der Erwachsenen, that 13 is the age when a person achieves majority, becomes an adult. Von Agodel in Seichel und Dea, which is more importantly than an age thing, a maturity thing, that the person now has a developed understanding of important elements of the world. And that's why at 13 the person is obligated to do all mitzvahs. Now you might argue that some children mature earlier. It is possible that a child could become a great intellectual even before 13 years old. As smart as the kid is, before 13, he will still lack das, the integration of ideas, and hergesh, a feeling and sensitivity for those concepts, which means that the child will still lack recognition and sensitivity. On the one hand side, the tarka and maila from kiyama mitzvahs will lack a real appreciation for the value of mitzvahs, as he will also lack a sense of the loss or lack if a person doesn't fulfill mitzvahs. And to illustrate this point in Chassidus, we compare it to a child's appreciation of material things. Chassidus brings the example of how a child relates to material things. Even when a child who's not yet 13 appreciates that having money is beneficial and having prestige is great. But to truly appreciate financial value is beyond him. To truly appreciate social standing is beyond a child. He knows it's good, but he doesn't understand what that means. And the corollary, in Shiflus Vedalus, an appreciation of either being a lowly individual or a poor individual, and of course the child realizes those are bad things. Still, the child will not have that profound insight and appreciation for how bad it is for a person to be destitute or how bad it is for a person to have no social standing. So der Riber is nicht verantwortlich für seine Meisim und Anhoga, because a child prior to the age of 13 doesn't have that deep, meaningful appreciation for the valuable or the non-valuable things in life. So he's not yet answerable for his behavior, for his behavior and conduct, and that's why this child cannot yet carry the yoke and responsibility of fulfilling mitzvahs. So Ish represents becoming a man, having insight and maturity, which is only from the age of 13 and on, represented by the word Ish. So it's strange then that in the stories of our Rabbeim, you very often find that the Barmitzvah Maimorim that they said invoked the term Adam, which is a different title of majority of adulthood. And even if sometimes in the final edited version they didn't actually include those lines, when they said the Maimor, that's how the Maimor often began. Rabbi Seinu and Hasiyainu haben kama vechama peomim b'chigas bar mitzvah gesagt a Maimer. Very frequently the Rabbeim at a bar mitzvah would say a Maimer on hebeding b'hin pasuk nase Adam, starting with a pasuk about the description of the first creation of the first human being. Let us make Adam. As der Verstandig, the fact that the Rabbeim used that line implies As the von Bar Mitzvah tashaychas eich zu the madrega von Adam, that not only is a Bar Mitzvah age related to the status of Ish, but also to the higher status of Adam. Was a hechere madrega with the Torah Ish. Adam always represents a more developed level of person than the word Ish. Okay, it's brought in numerous places in Chassidus. When it gets to the Fir Shemus, was I mentioned, wird mit sei angerufen, with regards to the 4 classical Torah titles for a human being: Adam, Ish, Gever, Enosh. As the herchste von die alle nehmen is the Shem Adam, was weiß Dev sein Shleimus. Throughout Chassidus, we always say the word Adam represents a person who has achieved the highest status that a person could achieve. If that's the case, his Nit movement doesn't really seem to make sense then. Seeing as in order to reach the point that a person is obligated to do mitzvahs, which is from the age of 13, is genug di madrega von ish, all the person has to reach is the level of ish, which represents maturity and understanding and insight. Why did the Rebbeim also link Bar Mitzvah to the much higher, more elusive level of Adam? It's good enough to be ish. Okay, let's understand. What's the difference between what the title Ish represents and what the title Adam represents? Because without that information, we can't really explore this topic. So the Unterschied zwischen Ish and Adam is, the distinction is as follows. Der Toyar Ish batzit sich to the Darge von Seichel, was es scheich zu midas hergesh alev. Ish represents somebody who has achieved a maturity in their mind with regards to their feelings. In other words, the part of the mind that guides a person to feel appropriately and to respond appropriately to stimuli in their life, that's the part that is mature. Of course, that has many levels and layers to it. In fact, the ultimate stage of being an Ish develops over many years. It starts at 13, but it actually really only reaches their full maturity at the age of 20, and that's why a person is only liable for certain things from the age of 20. That's when a person's mind can really direct their behavior and their character. Und der Teuer Adam, as compared to the concept of Adam, that beweist der Meile von Sech, was ist Heche von sein Scheich Zemidas. Adam represents mastery over pure intellect. Not intellect that is designed to turn me into a better person. Intellect that is objectively engaged in the pursuit of intellect. Now, like dem wird man noch mehr schwer. Now, that only makes it more difficult for us to understand. Der Zusammenhang von Neise Adam mit Bar Mitzvah. How do you link Neise Adam with Bar Mitzvah? Wie kann man verbinden die Meile von Adam? How can you now link this concept of Adam, which is so advanced, mit einem, was ist alt geworden, 13 Jahre, with a person who's just turned 13 and just entering the phase of Ish, just learning how to master emotions and how to control and direct character. And you're already talking about Adam, which is so much more advanced? Muss man sagen, leaves us with no choice but to say, as the kavana dabei is, that the intention of the Rebbeim is, yes, of course, there's no question at the age of Bar Mitzvah, a person becomes an Ish, with all that entails. But from the time a person is obligated to fulfill a mitzvah, the Adam sentiment already must play a role. It must influence how I fulfill mitzvahs. Now, right now, we don't understand exactly how that would manifest, but we'll explain it. The Mocker von Demas is nicht maspek die Darga von Ish. The truth is, how do we know that at the age of Bar Mitzvah, when a person undertakes the responsibility of mitzvahs, that it's insufficient only to access the level of Ish, and you actually need something beyond it? It actually is from the Pasuk Vayichol Gomer Yishchar by Gufa. It's from the Pasuk we have just quoted as the source that 13 is the age of Bar Mitzvah, the story of Shimon and Levi taking their swords at the time of their Bar Mitzvah. Varum lechaera is shver, because if it were not that way, then the whole interpretation of the pasuk doesn't make sense. The chiddush was kumtzu by Ben Yud Gimel Shana. Ostensibly, what's unique and new about the age of 13? And whatever is unique about the age of 13 would be why, from the age of 13, a child is obligated to do mitzvahs. Surely, It's not that now the child has become somebody with a different character and personality. It's that now the child has achieved a certain maturity that will influence their character and personality. It means now the child is mature enough in his mind to be able to start to understand things better. And because he's now in a position that he could really understand, as we mentioned earlier, the value of mitzvahs, so therefore you can expect of him to undertake the responsibility of mitzvahs. Now, if the message is a child at 13 has reached an age of intellectual maturity, which will help them develop their character, why then is the story that we use to prove it a story that actually seems to be a story of emotion? Angry brothers who want to avenge the treatment of their sister and therefore take their swords. This is a story of behavior that was driven by very intense emotion, tremendous anger. That's why the pasuk says. Or later on, Yaakov Avinu criticizes them. Oror apom. It's all about their anger. So hang on a second. The message is, at the age of 13, a child becomes intellectually mature. The source is a story of behavior that is midos driven. How does that match? Is therefore mashma, so therefore we have to look deeper into this pasuk and recognize as the fact that the pasuk describes how they took their swords and went out against Shechem, that doesn't describe an immature emotional response, but rather that actually represents a certain greatness of Shimon and Levi, something that is even beyond what Ish represents, and is able to take the Ish level to its ultimate expression. What does that mean? Well, because this pasuk alludes to the fact that it's not just being an Ish, but it's being an Ish in the highest possible way. That's why this is the pasuk. This is the pasuk not only that tells us 13 is when you start to do mitzvahs because you're now an Ish. This pasuk actually alludes to the fact that being an ish is actually not sufficient. There's something else. There's another layer. There's another degree of spiritual growth that is alluded to over here in the words taking their swords and going to battle. So we've got to work out what it is. Once we understand that even this pasuk that describes when you become an adult, an ish at the age of 13, is alluding to something beyond just the simple understanding of ish, somebody who's mature enough to know how to grow and develop their personality. So the fact that we're looking for something greater, that will help us understand why the Rabbeim, when they said Mamorim for Bar Mitzvahs, referenced Adam. Yes, generally you're right. Generally we all understand in the most broad level that in order to become a bar mitzvah, a person has to have a certain intellectual maturity and therefore the capacity to undertake Torah and mitzvahs. Von deswegen ist das allein nicht genug. Just that intellectual edge is not sufficient. Right from the start, the Bar Mitzvah boy needs to know that there has to be an Adam component, something that is greater than the Ish, something that makes you grab your sword and behave in a way that is beyond what the intellect is willing to understand. So we'll describe what the association is between Adam, this higher dimension of intellect, and taking the sword, which is described in the story. In order to explain this, let's first bring one other important piece of information. So far, the way that we have discussed this is, we all know that Bar Mitzvah is at the age of 13 because of the story of Shimon and Levi. Truth is, there are other opinions. This explanation hinges on those other opinions. When it comes to questioning what is the source of the fact that 13 is the age of the obligation of mitzvahs, there are two popular opinions. Aleph Kanal, the one we've mentioned, as Melent as Harois von unser Pasuk, you learn it from the Pasuk of Shimon and Levi. Bay is another opinion. Das is einer von den Shurim von seiner Halacha Moshe Sinai. A number of the Rishonim bring that this is something that was passed down. Halacha Moshe Sinai doesn't have necessarily a logical basis. That's what Eibishter decided. 13 is the age. Now, the chilek zwischen die zwei limudim, there's a big difference depending on which approach you take. It will give a totally different perspective on how this works. Because loy de erste deya, according to the first approach, which is Shimon and Levi, real people, they achieved maturity at the age of 13, and we learn from them. Then is them shinei hateva. That implies that at 13, a person's nature begins to change. As azoi is the teva von roiv b'nei Adam, as sedaitzen yorvet ben agodel b'seichel v'deya. That you can expect that the nature of people is, by the age of 13, their maturity progresses, their insight deepens. And therefore you can expect it across the board. The second opinion says this has got nothing to do with nature. This is something determined by Torah. It's a law. Von die Shiurim Halacha Moshe Sinai, one of the many descriptive definitions that are from Sinai. There doesn't have to be a logical explanation or a natural explanation. And in fact, it has nothing to do with nature. And this will have a practical application in halacha. The nafka mina la halacha is when bnei noach mechuyev bekim hamitzvos v'zei zayin mechuyev. We know that in addition to our mitzvahs, the rest of the world also has 7 Noachide laws that they have to follow. At what age do they become responsible to follow those mitzvahs? So, if I go with the first opinion, which is that this is a natural maturity that happens to boys at 13, as at time for ben Gimel mitzvahs is mitzad teva b'nei Adam, is the elder von Yud Gimel Shana mechayev oich b'nei Noach inam kim von zeri mitzvahs. Then, Jewish boys mature at 13, non-Jewish boys mature at 13, so therefore they are equally obligated to fulfill their respective sets of mitzvahs at the same age, because it's a natural transition. Whereas if you take the other approach, which is no, Barmitzvah is halacha l'Moshe Sinai, it has nothing to do with nature, it is something that is in the realm of Torah and mitzvahs. As a klal von Yigimel, the mitzvahs is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's verstandig. Then you've got to conclude as by bnei Noach was tzuzei loy nitnu hashiurim. Then when it refers to a non-Jewish person who is not bound by the measurements of Torah, and therefore is the gadlus tluya by jeden einum loit zayin seich v'das mitzad zayin techunas hateva. Then actually each individual would become obligated to fulfill the 7 Noachide laws at a different stage of life depending on their personal maturation. Interesting, right? So that's a nafka mina lahalocha. That's not really the part that we're most focused on. We want to understand what's the difference in our approach to avoida. What are we supposed to learn about serving Hashem if the concept of a bar mitzvah, the obligation to fulfill mitzvahs, is a natural transition based on biology, the body's clock, or if it's something which is invoked from on high, halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Let's translate these two views into our avoida. They'll translate into Zayin Tzvei. Find him in the Seder, wie es darf sein, die Ascholas Avoida von Aiden Kim HaTorah v'Mitzvahs. Well, this is a debate about the starting point of the obligation of mitzvahs. So the one is that the starting point is a natural phenomenon, and the other one is that the starting point is a divine phenomenon. That talks to two different ways about how does a Jew start their Avodas Hashem, from a perspective of what's natural or perspective of what is supernatural. So the first approach, which is that the age of 13 is a natural transition point in a person's life, so therefore it makes sense that at that time a person becomes obligated to fulfill mitzvahs, and therefore the message is that at that age you start to naturally understand the value of mitzvahs, and so you build your dedication on what you understand. Because what is the basis for the obligation to fulfill mitzvahs at 13? Maturity of the mind. So therefore, as then the message is, as soon as you become sensitive to the value of mitzvahs, that's when you become obligated to fulfill them. Is verstandig, as the Onet von seiner Avoid is an Onet von Tam V'das. That implies that the basis of a person's service of Hashem, obligation to do mitzvahs, is their understanding and appreciation, because it's their understanding and appreciation that has maturity enough to make them obligated to fulfill mitzvahs. Whereas like that zweite Deya aber, if you go with the second view, is das ben Gimel shana mus mekabel sein auf sich der mitzvahs, is es halacha leMoshe misinai. The fact that a 13-year-old has to undertake mitzvahs is something which was determined from Hashem. That's the Eibishter's instruction. It doesn't have to make sense to you. Well, then the basis of a person's obligation to fulfill mitzvahs is because I have to accept what the Eibishter wants from me, whether I understand it or not. Now, neither of these two is going to stand in absolute isolation. There is no concept of only Tam Vodas without Kabbalah Soul, and there's no concept of Kabbalah Soul without at least integrating it into your own mind as well. So, even when we go with the first opinion, as for impossible, that it's the pasuk about Shimon and Levi going to fight against Shem that teaches us as the ascholas avoida ben yogimel and mitzvahs, that's when you start the obligation of fulfilling mitzvahs at the age of 13, and that it is al pi tam bodas, that it's based on what you understand, because it's a natural phenomenon, reaching an age where you understand things better, so therefore you can be committed. Von deswegen still, look at the pasuk. Von dem gufa was melente sop from pasuk vayikhu gomer shcharboy gomer. It's not a pasuk about them sitting down and meditating on divine greatness or learning with their teachers or their parents, but it's them taking a sword and putting their lives on the line to save their sister. Apiula von Mesiras Nefesh. They were taking huge risk and literally risking their lives. Is muchach. That illustrates, as even according to this view, that the foundation of commitment to mitzvahs is rational, still is the von Kiyama mitzvahs verbunden mit der Avoide von Mesiras Nefesh and Amayla Mina Seichel, still their actual practical application of their dedication to Torah mitzvahs includes an element which is super rational, the willingness to put their life on the line, the Adam influence over the Ish. Something that is beyond the maturity I'm capable of at this stage, that's feeding in as well. And this is no contradiction to the way we've explained it, that the approach to Torah mitzvahs in this context is logical, rational basis. Because yes, we agree absolutely that the path to the commitment to Torah mitzvahs is an understanding and appreciation of the value of Torah mitzvahs. Yet at the same time, the foundation, the approach is through the rational mind, but the foundation is acceptance of Hashem's authority, and therefore willingness to do things even that I don't understand. Because it's only when a person operates from a foundation of accepting Hashem's authority, then can the avodah von kiyum mitzvahs mitasoga sein v'sedarf sein. Only then is it possible that the rational basis for my mitzvahs will actually be correct, that I won't go off onto a tangent of my own misinterpretation of Torah and mitzvahs. And we'll illustrate this from a very interesting line in the Torah that we kind of gloss over because we know exactly what it means until you see what Chassidus says. You realize, hang on a second, it's telling us something far more profound. So Funde Heichachas there too, one of the indications that this is the balance, that of course you have to understand and appreciate Torah and mitzvahs, but the foundation must be Kabbalah soul, dedication to Hashem. In the Azoros HaKlol Yosef Kima Torah mitzvah state, when Moshe Rabbeinu tells us an overarching warning about how we should be dedicated to Torah mitzvahs, he says, says the Eibush tells me to tell you that he's presenting you with the choice of life and the opposite, right? Life and goodness and the opposite. And you should choose life. Now, if you think about it logically, if a person learns about Torah mitzvahs, observes what Torah mitzvahs are, you could see, this is good, this is valuable, this is enriching, this is what I should choose. Why does the Eibush have to tell him, choose what's good? Just show us it's good and then we'll choose it. You don't have to show us it's good and then tell us to choose it. No, the Bir Bazet is a profound reason for this. Die Bechira von der Menschen in Torah Mitzvahs wird sein, mir Yusud nur auf sein Seichel Avona v'Yediyah. If the basis for a person's dedication to Torah Mitzvahs is his personal appreciation and understanding, that all of Torah Mitzvahs is real life and absolute goodness, is it damit noch nicht kein Ovedash Avai, then the person not serving the Eibishter, he's serving himself. It's a good investment. I'm going to be able to rest on a Shabbos, spend time with my family, have a healthy marriage, eat in a way that's more meaningful, etc. I'm not serving Hashem, I'm serving me. To serve the Eibishter is like a servant serving a master. Als was ein Eved tut, ist das mit dem Öl, was ein Orden hat auf ihm aufgelegt. Everything the servant does is because of the authority imposed on him by his master. Und der Pfarrer darf der Bechira Sodom in Torah Mitzvah sein, mit dem Tzivah HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'charta b'chaim. So therefore, layered over the fact that I appreciate that Torah Mitzvahs are worthwhile for me and enrich my life, overlaying that has to be, the Eibishter told me this is what I have to choose. I'm choosing it out of duty and commitment to Hashem, not just personal appreciation. Now, Fadim is the pasuk makdim, no sati goyim. But before we get there, the pasuk first speaks our language. It says, look, let me show you what's good about this. And even when the Eibishter tells you choose a particular path, he says it is the path of life. Weil der Eibishter will as Inyan HaTorah Mitzvah soll durchdringen the ganze Metzius von Menschen, because the Eibishter doesn't want us only to accept what he says, he wants us to integrate what his instruction is so that it becomes ours, that we own it, that we relate to it, that we absorb it. And therefore it is critically important that the human mind should also be able to appreciate the value of the Torah mitzvahs that I'm dedicated to do. And now we can get a clarity on why a bar mitzvah, which is really the stage of ish in a person's life, is also associated with the aspirational stage of Adam. In the Bir von Torah Adam gefindt mit zwei Teilen. The two ways that we could explain what's so great about being called an Adam. Aleph, the first we've already discussed. Tachlis Hashlemus from B'china Seichel Kanal Siv Gimel. That Adam represents mastery over the mind, complete mastery. But there's another greatness of the word Adam, that is based Adam Oisios Me'oid. Adam is the same letters as the word Me'oid, which means exponential. B'chinas bli gvul was is hecher von Seichel, something which cannot be limited, cannot be confined, and is totally beyond the intellect. So Adam could take you to the highest level of Seichel, or it could take you Me'oid beyond Seichel. On die Bechine in the mention drückt sich aus in dem, was is Medaber. By the way, where you see this in the human being, this exponential value is the fact that we can speak. Warum sein Kecha Dibber kommt von dem Blick Wulsche benafshi, was is hecher von Meiles Seichel. Because the capacity for a person to be able to speak draws from the infinite nature of the soul, the part of the soul that is beyond intellect. Fascinating concept. The fact that Adam represents two very different concepts. Total intellect, total beyond intellect. And if they're both represented by the same word, they must be linked. How are they linked? Let's translate it into how we serve the Eibishter, which will show us this link. When the mensch comes to Tachlis Hashleimus and Seichel, the message is that even when a person reaches the ultimate level of mind, of intellect, of understanding, of appreciation of godliness, where a person reaches the state of Adam Seichel, which is way beyond the state of Ish Seichel. Ish Seichel is pragmatic. It's how you influence yourself to behave well. Adam Seichel is true intellect. Even when you get there, the person still has to push themselves beyond that to complete Mesiras Nefesh, absolute dedication to the Eibishter in a way that is super rational. And equally important, it has to work the other way too, because sometimes people forget about that. Even in those scenarios where a person feels the burning light of their own neshama to the point that they are willing to sacrifice everything for the Eibishter, soll sich damit nicht begnügen. Person can't be satisfied, as amazing as that is. Total dedication to the Eibishter, yes, but that's not the end of the road. Nur soll sich mestadel sein, as dem Sis Nefesh soll durchdringen, seine Keches apnimim kanal sifches. The goal is to get that superlative connection to Hashem to integrate into normal daily activities, into the mind, into emotions, into speech, into action. And that entire part of the human being begins with their mind. So to live as a Jewish person is to live with an incredible paradox that I'm supposed to understand to the best of my abilities, but then behave in a way that's beyond what I understand, and then take the energy of living with absolute dedication beyond my understanding and reintegrate it back into what I understand and appreciate and live. And so that's how you keep growing and developing. Und das ist einer von den Ramosim in dem, was man hat gesagt, zur Barmitzvah, der Maimer Naise Adam, the Rabbi alluded to Barmitzvah Bachrim by saying the Maimer Naise Adam at the Barmitzvah, zu weisen, to illustrate to them, that here you are, you're a child who's now become an ish. You have now accessed this dimension of your mind that will allow you to develop your personality and your character traits in the best way possible. Was damals vetter gerufen ish. That's why we're now calling you ish. Is this nicht genug? So you're starting a journey. You've just been given a massive key to access a whole treasure trove of personal growth. No, from day one, that's not good enough. Und darf noch als ankommen zu der Avodah von Ishchar Gomer. There's still an aspiration you have to go out and take your sword, meaning to say Avodah Samsis Nefesh Elamayla Miseichel, to have a dedication to the Eibishter with complete sacrifice beyond anything you'll ever understand. Was verbunden mit Bechinas Adam Oisius Me'oid, which is linked to the Adam component, the Me'oid, the superlative component, and then of course to bring it back in and integrate it so it becomes who you are rather than just something you do. And that's how a person connects to the Eibishter properly.